I want to try something a bit different here. Let's talk about romantic comedies and dramas, or rather how they're disappearing from theaters. It feels like we're losing the sacred texts of the genre. If you haven't noticed, studios have been backing away from these films for the past couple of years, shoving them into streaming services like Netflix and Amazon Prime. And you know what? Let's be honest, it hasn't been a good time for the genre as of late. Most romantic films nowadays live in algorithmic wastelands of streaming services where the quality of romantic films usually fight for attention against the cheap, generic content. Even great films get buried, like Rye Lane, a hidden gem that premiered on Hulu only to be swept under the rug by its platform's obsession with generic, algorithmic hits. To put it lightly, streaming has suffocated the genre. The depth, the nuance, the craft, all of that in romantic storytelling is basically being locked behind a paywall. But you know what? Here's the thing. I've basically fallen in love with these types of films, no pun intended. As a hopeful romantic, I see them as human studies through the explorations of desire, vulnerability, and connection. Movies like Call Me By Your Name and Crazy Rich Asians and Rye Lane don't just entertain, they teach us how to navigate our own emotions in real life. This is where Past Lives comes into the mix. Celine Song's debut didn't just remind us what romantic films could be, it basically reignited the seriousness of the genre. This wasn't just a love story, it was just a very quiet, aching meditation on fate and longing in the modern age. The real lived-in characters offered raw humanity throughout the film. Each character wanted the best for each other, the dialogue between them actually meant something, and they would always talk to each other with such attentiveness in their tone of their voice. It proves that romantic films in cinema isn't quite dead. It just needs a storyteller that is attentive and emotive to the romance itself. Also, I gotta shout out to my Asian brothers for making a good romantic film a couple years ago called Crazy Rich Asians. Like, that shit got me ballin'. And on top of that, Celine Song's Past Lives being kind of like one of the best romantic films in the past couple years. I guess you guys know what to do with the romance and the whole idea of romance not being dead in media. Also, shout out to Justin Kuritsky for Challengers, because it seems like Challengers is also heavily tied with Celine Song's overall feelings and emotions with the romance, as they are in a relationship together and they really like threesomes and thruples and just all that jazz. Now we get into Song's new film, The Materialists, which is basically a look inside of a full-blown satire of modern romance. From the promos, she's playing around with the classic romantic tropes by hiring attractive leads, utilizing snappy dialogue, and even using nostalgia with the return of the trailer voiceover to, emphasize the early 2000s vibes. So my question is this her own Jules and Jim for the modern age? And you know what? The Jules and Jim comparison doesn't actually work out or pan out for this film, because it's actually much better and more streamlined compared to Jules and Jim. So let me kind of backpedal and explain the plot of this film and kind of explain why I really enjoyed this film. So starting from the beginning, this film is about a matchmaker who lives in New York, played by Dakota Johnson. She's Lucy. She's very attractive and very good at her job, where basically she's this person who understands the intricacies and emotions of dating in the modern age. And Lucy shows up at this wedding reception for one of her clients who is getting married. And Lucy is really good at kind of talking to her clients in a way that make them feel good. Lucy alleviates an issue with the client who's soon to be married, and after all that is going on, she kind of has a kind of spell of emotions where she's kind of at a point where she can't really figure out her own life. And this is where Harry comes into the picture, as he's at this wedding reception single, and he's trying to look for love, and eventually they both link up and they have a little courtship and relationship immediately, while John, played by Chris Evans, is in the middle of the situation, as he's a caterer and shows up at this wedding and tries to bring back his old senses to Lucy. And that causes a little rift between Lucy, John, and Harry, which, by the way, Harry doesn't really fully go deep into the rift of the throuple situation. He's kind of just in the background while Lucy and John are trying to get their stuff straight, no pun intended. But This whole film is basically a exploration, a deep dive, a deconstruction of the modern age of romance. And I thought this film was very impactful. I thought this film also really does a good job with really trying to like spread out the emotions of three of our main characters. As Lucy herself, again, she's kind of blunt and straightforward with her intentions of what she wants for a man, and she basically explains that she wants a man who is rich, you know, tall, has a lot of like prestige in his life. And even before that, Lucy and John, their relationship before was all about, you know, pain and suffering, but also at the same time, they were suffering with financial troubles. And Lucy just like straight up tells John in front of traffic in New York City that like, I can't, you know, have this relationship because you're broke and I don't need that in my life. I need someone who's stable and aware and has money and is able to like live around and live through New York City. And you know, that's totally understandable because that's usually the part of the deal of a relationship is you kind of have to have, you know, good finances. I've been through that, yeah. But pretty much I could say that the straights are in really bad trouble. They need some help, and this is where the gay guy in this situation comes in and tries to dissect some of the troubles of these three people in this film. And what I got is something that feels very connected with the modern age and is very not entirely angsty, but feels a little bit angsty, but also at the same time is very self-aware of some of the quirks and feelings of what it's like to date in the modern age, especially as a straight person. I'm not straight, I'm gay. I can go both ways. I can hit and quit it both ways. And watching this, I was just like, yeah, this just feels like a human documentary. I'm just experiencing three people as they're trying to like stumble through life and romance. So the other positive things that I can say is that Dakota Johnson really holds herself down in this film. Usually her style of acting is very deadpan and straight and forward, and she also kind of like makes fun of herself sometimes, and you can really tell throughout the film that she's kind of like tiptoeing between very great self-confidence in herself, but also at the same time she's hiding something in her, and she can't really like explain why she's having those feelings towards other men in her life. And I think Dakota Johnson plays that like type of character well in these types of films, and it works here compared to, you know, other films like Madame Web, which I won't explain. But also Pedro Pascal, who again, he's playing himself, but I feel like himself works in this type of film. He's playing the guy who is very at a point where he's very comfortable, he has a lot of money, he's very confident in himself, but deep down there's also something that's hiding in the background. And I won't explain what happens in the third act where he kind of reveals something that happened to him with his, you know, his own self. But it was a really interesting kind of take on it, and I think it's a make it or break it situation where it could break the audience and kind of like break it into, you know, hilarity. But I think here it works because it's self-explanatory, and it does actually kind of like reference something that Dakota Johnson says in the beginning of the movie as she's talking to someone, one of her coworkers. And Chris Evans as well is also really, really great. I'm glad he's actually doing something different compared to, you know, his typical shtick that he does where he's playing like the evil bad guy or someone who's just like scummy. But here he's playing like the guy who's trying to like figure out himself and also kind of like fumble the attraction of Lucy. And I really, really enjoyed his performance here. And some other characters appear also in this film, and there's a subplot in this film that kind of plays around with the emotions of setting up someone for a date, and it causes some damage to Lucy's psyche as a client has some trouble with one of their, matchmake clients, and this causes kind of like a emotional rift between Lucy and the client, and I think it was handled pretty well. There are some moments where you can kind of tell that maybe for some people it could be a little bit borderline clumsy, but I feel like what it's trying to say in that kind of like rift really plays into the emotions of modern romance. And yeah, and again, I do think this film does play more with a broader audience, and that kind of surprised me because Celine Song, her style of filmmaking compared to past lives is more, you know, restraint, indie, more complex. And this film does have like its complexities, but It also is a mainstream romantic fare film, and I think she tries to have her cake and eat it, and it does work. For me, personally, it does. For some, it might not. But I think here she's playing a lot with the modern emotions of life in general, and it just works. I think it just totally works. And just, yeah, overall, I think this film is just, it's really, really great. I don't really have too much problems with it. I think the only thing that I can probably nitpick is ethics of matchmaking and like how it actually works in this like modern age, especially since the workplace that Lucy works in isn't fully explained and isn't fully adaptable to what, you know, the ethics go with you know, the service, but at the same time you kind of have to just take it as it is. And again, it could piss some people off with that motivation and kind of like thematic, but I really enjoyed this. I was really in my feelings watching it, and this is something that is very smart and very witty and very self-aware of just the entire feelings of romance nowadays, and I keep on repeating it, but that's what the film is. I highly recommend it. It's a good date movie. It's a good adult movie. It's a movie that I think will age pretty well past its time this year, and it's one of the best films of the year for me personally. So I give this a 4.5 out of 5. I cannot wait to see what Celine Song is cooking next. Hopefully, I feel like she's probably gonna go something different this time around with her next film. I don't think she's gonna continue doing like the throuple situation again. I think she's gonna like do something a little bit different, but in terms of awards, I don't see this going anywhere. I thought the screenplay in some moments kind of like drags itself with some of the internal external monologues. It's very broad and straightforward with its dialogue compared to Past Lives, where there's a lot of like intricacies and kind of dialogue that feels more poetic and more stagey and not in a way where it's half-assed. But I think here it's not one of those films that gets, you know, awards attention. I think it's more of a triumph of great romantic cinema, and I think we still need that in this day and age. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I will be reviewing more films on this channel, as you can tell, and I will also kind of like keep up some of the newer releases, and maybe I might be doing my best of 2025 so far list video. I'm still recovering from my allergies, but yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Take care of yourselves. Peace out.